So, I have just come away from watching episode 4 of Andor, and it's an absolutely brilliant continuation from the 3-episode premiere last week. We are now, a third of the way through this show so far, and it's easily shaping up to be the best Star Wars live-action show from Disney by a country mile. As always, this review will contain spoilers, so you have been warned. So today's episode really took its time to focus on the dialogue, and it's one of the longest live-action Star Wars TV episodes we've ever had, and it really does make the most of that time to really try and continue that exceptional world building and character development from the previous episode. It starts off with Cassian and Luthen in his ship just after they've escaped, and there is some exceptional dialogue between the two, where Luthen is really trying to get into the psyche of Cassian to try and make him realise that his true ambition is to help destroy the Empire in some way. And there's a really nice back and forth between these two characters, where Cassian is just trying to keep up a facade of a kind of careless mercenary. But Luthen, over the course of the conversation, manages to navigate his way through it by slowly breaking down Cassian's walls. And the writing here is just so good, and the real standout performance is Stellan Skarsgård in this episode, who is phenomenal, especially with some of his line delivery. Cassian ultimately agrees to do one mission for Luthen, and they arrive on the planet Aldhani, and for some of you that may have missed it, this is where the massive, and I mean massive, Knights of the Old Republic connection, which I was honestly gobsmacked to hear in a piece of live-action Star Wars media, occurs. I really never thought anything like this would show up. So Luthen gives Cassian a down payment to commit to the mission, but it wasn't in credits. It was a crystal that he had wrapped around his neck, and he says that this crystal is Blue Kyber, Skystone, the Ancient World, a celebration of uprising against the Rakatan invaders. Now, the fact that this crystal is a Kyber crystal alone has huge story ramifications, because as we know, Kyber crystals are a natural occurrence that then are used to channel the Force into technology. This is a clear indication that the Rakatans in some way used Kyber crystals to power their Force-based technology. Additionally, he mentioned that it's a unique crystal, a blue Kyber crystal skystone from the ancient world. There's only one planet that he can be talking about here, and that is Rakata Prime, the unknown world, aka Lehon. It is very, very significant to mention a thing like this in a piece of live-action media. The Rakatan Infinite Empire is so ancient and so far removed that to directly mention it and Rakata Prime and their impact on the wider galaxy in an episode of Andor just kinda took me by surprise. So Cassian takes this crystal and Luthen goes out to speak to a woman known as Vel, and this is where we have some incredible line delivery from Stellan Skarsgård. I thought it was brilliant, who convinces Vel to take Cassian on board on their mission on this planet. She then agrees, and there's some more dialogue between her and Cassian talking about, themselves and the mission in general, and just kind of the secrecy around what they're trying to do. We then switch over, and we're on Coruscant, and firstly we're introduced to the Imperial Security Bureau, and this is again where there's just a scene of incredible dialogue. There's a number of Imperial officers and their leader, I presume, who are arguing about their sectors and what their role in the galaxy actually is within this security bureau. And then we're also introduced to some woman who I believe is going to be some kind of antagonist. I can't remember the name of her off the top of my head, but she's trying to work her way up through the ranks of the Imperials. But she is clearly looked down upon. Coruscant itself looks absolutely amazing. It's kind of bewildering why it's never really showed up in any other stories, and it's finally nice to see this iconic planet back, and you can really tell they went all out with the presentation of this show down to every single detail. The visual effects are brilliant, the sets are fantastic, the costumes are great, the backgrounds look good, even just the extras walking around in the backgrounds and whatnot, and so far it's an absurd kind of standout just how much better this show looks in terms of its presentation to every other Star Wars show that we've had so far. And it really does make you wonder why this level of craftsmanship and attention to detail and just love wasn't kind of put into other shows. And like I said a bit earlier, this whole section in the Imperial Security Bureau is just really expanding the world building. And this time we're not just stuck on one little planet, like the first 3 episodes, we're seeing the wider galaxy and, how the Imperials really do think they're doing the right thing, and that their actions are kind of like in tandem to doctors healing a wound. The Imperials then go to the planet that were in the episodes last week, and they take over all of the security and essentially berate the security teams for their failures. And this clearly really gets to the villain of last week's episode, Cyril, who decides to just leave and go back to his parents. And we can see that he is distraught by this failure, and I'm looking to see more of him in the future, but he doesn't really have too much to do in this episode. A little bit further down the line in this episode, we're then introduced to the fact that Luthen is actually a historical artifact dealer on Coruscant, and Mon Mothma comes to visit his artifact dealership, and they're talking about a gift for her husband. They then go around the back, and the way that Stellan Skarsgård just switches from funky artifact dealer into this really serious, focused man is just, again, another standout of his acting performance. He is just brilliant in this episode. And it's nice to see Genevieve O'Reilly really actually get to play Mon Mothma for once, instead of just kind of being a side character. And she's really given a chance to shine here with some great dialogue. And we really get to see that, she's struggling to maintain this image within the Senate because she's being watched so closely. Everything she's doing to try and help the rebellion is just becoming so much more difficult. Now, I really wish we got to see a little bit more of this artifact shop. There's a little reference to an artifact from like 14,000 years ago, and I'm just sitting there like, come on, tell me what it is. I want to know more about the history. But knowing that Luthen is now a primary character in this show, and the fact that he's an artifact dealer, just kind of gives me hope that maybe we're going to get more references and, just more of the ancient history in Star Wars that hasn't really been delved into just yet. Now, we stay with Mon Mothma a little bit, and she goes back home, and we can see she has a kind of tense relationship with her husband. I'm curious to see what they're going to do with that, because it seems that he has this kind of carefree attitude about things, especially when it comes to the Empire, while she doesn't. We then switch back to Cassian on this planet, and he's introduced to a group of rebellion fighters. And from here on, it is slower. It's all about dialogue. It's all about building connections and building the world and the moment. And the interactions between all of these characters within the camp just exacerbate the secret nature and just how fragile the rebellion is at this specific point in time, and just how easily it could come crumbling down if they're not extremely careful. And it's because of this that none of them really take too kindly, apart from one guy who comes across as a bit of a naive kid. And the final parts of this episode really are just Cassian and the team trying to get to know each other and further his relationship with this group. We also learned here that this mission is also kind of a suicide mission, which makes Cassian rethink his position a little bit. But I think this specific story arc in the show is slowly going to set up and show us the point where Cassian truly commits to the rebellion. Because right now we can clearly see in all of his interactions that he is kind of on edge on what he wants to do. As for action, there was absolutely none in this episode, and that's not a bad thing. This episode was solely devoted to being slow-paced, building up some good character moments, some good tension, some good dialogue, and just building the world. And it's nice to see a Star Wars show just give time to that, and I have to commend them for making this one of the longest episodes that I've ever seen in Star Wars live action, and dedicating it to the nuances of storytelling rather than just mindless action, which we've got from other Star Wars shows. And I am so excited to see where this story goes next, because not only do we have the chance to create some brilliant characters, I mean Luthen is amazing, but just seeing the inner workings of the Empire and the Imperial Security Bureau, and just how all of this is going to connect with the political realm of Star Wars in its state at the moment. There is just so much potential with what they're doing, and now I've seen 4 episodes in that they're willing to take this story and give it the time it needs to slowly develop. It's actually kind of revived my interest in Star Wars TV, because it's just that good, and I really didn't think we would get this from a Star Wars TV show. You can tell that they've put so much love into the finer details, from the writing to the visuals, even to the music, which is slowly getting better. And I really do think that we're onto a winner with this show, and I really hope it stays this way. As always, if you enjoyed the review, don't forget to hit the like button, it helps me out a great deal. And if you want to be kept up with all of my reviews for Andor, perhaps consider subscribing so you are notified for my review next week. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.